Okay, my name is Robert, and this is a video for Professor Gavin, Mr. Gavin's English class at St. Lawrence College. And yeah, my name is Robert Stasny. That's not important. This video is about my experience with poetry, with writing poetry, because I don't know if I should call myself a poet. I don't know. People use the word poetry rather loosely, and also the word poet and artist very loosely. I think in America, people have started using the word creative to avoid using the word artist, because it's just a bit pretentious to say I'm an artist, because a lot of people don't make art. But whatever. Point being is, I write poetry, and this is a video about my experience with writing poetry and some opinions. So obviously it's subjective. It basically a lot of people will disagree with what I have to say or whatnot, but whatever. My video. I'm trying to stay kind of formal and polite. So I was gonna swear there. I'm not gonna swear. I'm gonna try not to. Yeah. So to the students in St. Lawrence College, I'd like to say that I attended St. Lawrence from '94 to '96. Grew up in Quebec City, which basically means that most of you weren't born from '94 to '96. I never took Glenn's class. My English teachers were Lauren Coughlin, among others, who I think he's retired, Lauren, now. Anyways, poetry for me was more of an accident. I think it is for a lot of people. A lot of people take up art because they're in trouble. That was my case, because I used to make fun of poetry. Back after St. Lawrence, I went to McGill, and I was living with these two guys from Quebec, and we used to just make fun. I mean, one of my buddies, O'Grady, had this old book of Irish poems, and when we really wanted to have a good time and to have a laugh, we'd go into a room, and two of the guys would sit on my bed, and then one of the guys would open the poetry book and just start reciting. And the guy reciting would never get past like the second line. Everybody would just be cracked up, bent over in pain. I mean, huge cramps, laughing. That was, for a lot of people, that's what poetry is, especially growing up in North America, where, it's not the most poetic of environments. It's a business-driven culture. And, poetry has, in a large part, disappeared from the mainstream, be it with the advent of film or later on music. And then everybody says that the poets have moved into songwriting. Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So, yeah, I think the last or the only poet who's ever really made money, paid his rent or her rent with poetry, directly through this kind of do-it-yourself market approach, was Bukowski in like the 70s or something, and he really had to make a circus of himself, because poetry wasn't enough, so he had to really get loud and talk about tits and dick and get drunk and all that kind of stuff. But and then of course many others have, I think, made their mark and gotten Ted Hughes awards, but that's a lot through kind of this very elitist kind of thing that poetry has become. Who knows, maybe it always has been, but I don't see why it should be. You're supposed to be addressing the public in general, not just some kind of upper class, upstate New York bunch of friends who publish each other and who, all in all, with all due respect, sell no poetry books. But and then they kind of give each other awards and prizes and whatnot. So there's plenty of money that way through, all kinds of residencies and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that has to be the case. I think recently I met a publisher. I live in Berlin, by the way. I'm more, as a lot of people say, I'm based in Berlin, but I live in Berlin because, fuck. People use the term based because they presume that, this is where I'm based, but I fly around and I go everywhere. It's not really like that, especially not on a poetry budget, and not today with all these restrictions. You can't travel. So, and I've got a broken foot right now. So I'm not just based here. I pretty much live in this apartment. And sorry, I'm skipping from one thing to the next, but we're going to try to keep this as kind of streamlined as possible. A publisher once told me that they don't publish poetry because poetry is written by a small community for a small community. And that's bullshit. I'm not a part of any small community. I live here, I've got a roommate, and I write for, the idea is you write for as wide an audience as possible. I mean, is there anything less poetic than to exclude people, right? Also the other thing is I've self-published a book, which has got flaws, but nonetheless I self-published a book in 2017 called Portraits, and it's been selling. I've sold like 250 copies of it in Berlin. So it's not true that poetry doesn't sell and it blah 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 blah. So let's start by the beginning. I got into trouble in 2002 at the Massif that's Rivière Saint-François. I had a snowboard accident and I hit my head pretty bad, and I continued snowboarding. It was hit my head repeatedly over 2 days, and it was just bad. And 5 days later, my brain kind of crashed, and I had headaches, lingering kind of headaches at the back of my head that stayed for 5 years. And that was really tough. That was hell, because there's no way, doctors don't really know how to treat that. They don't know that much about the brain. And so at some point later, a year later, in 2003, a friend of mine wanted to go see this movie, this documentary called Born Into This, about Bukowski, who I didn't know at all. And I was like, all right, whatever. So we went, and there was something that he said in that documentary, and he said that he too, after a kind of bad episode where he wasn't treated at the hospital and he almost bled out, he went from writing prose to writing poetry, because he said that poetry made it possible for him to scream. And that really spoke to me, because I needed to scream. I was, and do it kind of differently than just getting drunk, which I was getting drunk, but, do it in a kind of maybe less vulgar way, maybe a bit of a more intelligent way than doing less intelligent screaming. And I started writing poetry. I myself had written a lot as a child, and then as an early adolescent, but then, like a lot of people, I just quit and got sucked into the good old business world, and we take that world to be the way things are. It's about getting a job, making money, and you kind of accept that you're a bit cynical about everything, but you think that's life, and there's no other way of living. Anyways, I took up writing, and then eventually, I guess, fast forward about 5 years, and I was in a small apartment in Eastern Europe, and I'd written quite a bit, or some poetry, and then I came to Berlin. I had some friends of mine who were getting married, and here I kind of discovered the art world a little bit. I went to a museum and I realized that the art world was my place. Art was a language. It was the way I communicated. And I felt less strange. I felt like I belonged somewhere. The suit and tie world, I was doing well in it, working for big firms and all, but I wasn't happy. Actually, I was pretty unhappy. And let me try to adjust this a little bit. There you go. Because this camera's not too fucking... Anyways, it is what it is. And yeah, sorry, screen's crooked. I'm doing my best. Yeah, and strangely, my headaches went away. I mean, as soon as I kind of took off my suit and tie, and I'd seen a lot of doctors. I'd gone to Chicago, seen a guy who treated me for $20,000, took $20,000 off of me because of course I wasn't insured, and you know, the medical business is a business, and for people who are in pain, that's great business, because all you got to go around and say that you've got a solution, and somebody who's in pain wants to hear that. They want to hear that you have a solution for them. So in Chicago, this guy injected 200 injections of saline solution, which is basically salt water, into my neck. And it was just bullshit. I was lying there, my blood was dripping. I was kind of having to, it was bad. And none of that helped, but art helped. I took off my suit and tie and I started writing, and my headaches started leaving. So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. It's a bit like the prisoner who, the guy who, or the person who goes to prison and who, you know, discovers religion in prison, and then becomes, you know, all about Jesus or whatnot, or like Mike Tyson becomes a devout Muslim in prison. So point being is, yeah, that's how I came from, I guess, really having a good laugh about poetry to, I guess, using it. For me, it was a bit of a spiritual experience. So I wrote more and more, and I got something published in 2008. And I guess that could be the next kind of subject to talk about, because I sent in something like 499 words. 500 words was the limit. I sent something into an American publication. It was then called Mannequin Envy. It was based in New York, and it was this quarterly of poetic and visual art. And yeah, there was this editor. She was from Calgary, actually, and she basically wrote me back and said that if I accept a radical edit, if I accept the fact that she had removed more than half of what I wrote, there were 233 words left, and fuck that. Anyways, it is what it is. You have to suck it up. And yeah, so that really defined my style, my way of writing, because it was a bit like sculpture. I mean, she hadn't changed anything in the text, but she removed like more than half of something that was a very autobiographical piece. A lot of times our first kind of piece that we write is very autobiographical, and for me that then really defined my style, because a lot of my writing, especially my earlier writing, or even some of my better pieces that I still really like a lot today, are a bit like sculpture. So I start by writing a longer text, and then you just remove everything that isn't necessary. A friend of mine once told me that Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea was a poem, and in a way that's right, and Hemingway himself said that he was really satisfied with it, because there wasn't even one comma, one word, one comma that, couldn't be removed. He'd removed everything. He'd really stripped it down to the bare minimum, and every single letter in that text was necessary. So I think that's what you're going for with poetry. You're trying to tell a whole story, beginning, a middle, and end, a title, this kind of gestalt where you have a sum of the parts that is greater than the whole, where basically you are delivering a novel's worth in, something a lot shorter. And Clark also, who I like a lot, said that she's a wonderful musician and also poet. And like she has pointed out, it's tough to really say something in a few words. So none of my poetry is really epic. It doesn't really go on for pages. And most of it has started from longer text to eventually just get chiseled down, removed. And some of these texts I've worked on for over 10 years. So there are little texts that eventually you get to a point where you're like, yeah, this is it, this works. I think another thing I'd like to say about poetry is that most of my writing happens, or about my poetry, is that most of my writing happens in English. But English is my third language. In French Canada and Quebec, a lot of people, for them, English is their second language. But in my case, I was born in Eastern Europe. And I think that's the case for most English speakers today. Most people who speak English today, they've learned English off of YouTube or whatnot, and most of them are self-taught. So, it's one thing to write in this kind of very 19th century Victorian kind of way where you are saying things in fucking 5 lines instead of one terse line, because, it's a very pleasing, educated way to go on and on with double negatives and all that kind of stuff. I'm not really into that. I think it wastes people's time. I think especially today, people don't have that much time for, maybe even for this video, because I could be more organized and, have edited things out and whatnot. But yeah, so I also think I definitely do believe in, using a 3-letter word if the 3-letter word works. At the end of the day, music, the music of a sentence really matters, and what you say, the content matters. So yeah, my English is something I like to call post-American, because like the French say, Americans don't speak English, they speak American. Like they say, in Quebec people say Quebec, people speak Quebecois, not French, which is very true, even though kind of Quebec's got this kind of weird Jesuit past where, it's all very rigid, and strangely the French that we are taught in school has absolutely nothing to do with the French that people speak, which 99.5, if not more, percent of the people in Quebec speak. That's that's Quebecois. But anyways, so and my English, I think, goes a bit past the American thing, because in a lot of the way I will use my syntax and the way a sentence is structured and organized, for me what matters most is to be understood. So I'll borrow a lot either from Slavic or from Latin, so non-Anglo-Saxon bases. And for me, if the music fits better, if it makes a reader understand, see, if it makes the reader see and hear and everything exactly what you're trying to say, then that's the right English. if you're going to write like that, I think you do, because the vast majority of English speakers today, the internet world and in today's world, are non-native English speakers. It's not just about North America or the UK before that, or even the West. And but if you are going to write like that, you're not going to make a lot of friends in the publishing world, and certainly not in the established world who, need you to write like this or write like that. I'm a big fan of Foster Wallace, or I definitely liked his writing a lot, and he could be very obsessive and about where one placed the word only or didn't place the word only. Well, he's not around anymore, but he'd have to suck it up, because I place the word only wherever, I feel that it fits best. And at the end of the day, though, you do have to respect the English language somewhere, so there's a middle ground to be found. And at the end of the day, somebody very recently told me that I use the expression at the end of the day too often. You have to, people either like it or they don't. I'm not the judge of my poetry. Others are, and time is, So even the fact that I have, that my book has sold a lot, maybe that's because I've packaged it in a smart way, or been busy around my poetry, and for some reason that has gotten it off to a good start. But 5 years from now, well, it's been 3 years now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's gonna die off. At the end of the day, and that is Lauren Coughlin at St. Lawrence who taught me that, and he basically said that time was really what was most important, because you need the writer to die off, the friends of the writer to die off, the friends of the friends of the friends of the writer to die off. It's not about doing favors for somebody. You pick up Edgar Allan Poe and you read it and hopefully you love his writing because it's good, not because it's doing something for anyone, of his friends. So, or people he dines with, or somebody dines with. So that's another thing. And also another thing that Lauren taught me, and this is a very sensitive issue today, especially here in Berlin. Berlin's a very hip kind of city, and everybody's into very hip subjects. And obviously they're into very hip subject, be it Black Lives Matter or other subjects, and in other words, political subjects. And Lauren always said that, you want to stay away from politics. That doesn't carry through time very well. And at the end of the day, poetry has to be about poetry. Picasso only did Guernica. And, at the end of the day, if your voice is getting out there because you're saying very true and necessary things about politics, that's one thing, but that doesn't mean that you're a good poet, So there are a lot of artists out there who even insist and say that poetry has to be political and art has to be political and it has to be useful. It doesn't fucking have to be anything, right? And nobody can come and put a gun to my head and say, pick a side. I write poetry. It's what I do. And like one of my very good friends said, do I need to be stating that I'm not a racist? We're presuming that I'm not a racist, right? So, hats off to a lot of people who do take on causes, but I really do, support and applaud their writing. Sure, do that, but you also got to do something more. You also got to give me a little poetry or a little painting or a little music, in addition to, supporting your cause. And again, this might be strange for white male to be saying that, but that touches on to another subject. I've recently I went to a bookshop and I said, hey, I want to do some readings, and this bookshop owner said, okay, but we only do readings if you get another poet to do a reading with you. So I'm like, okay, I know this other guy and he's really good. And then ends up that the other guy is a white male as well. And, the guy's like, no, well, we can't just have white males reading. And, fuck you, because not specifically this bookshop owner, but generally speaking, because what am I? Am I like the voice of oppression because I'm white? No, right? So at the end of the day, again, I think what matters is, are you saying something? And it should, doors should be open, whatever. Voices should be heard, no matter what you are, female, male, other. And that then, going to the next subject, was why I set up this website called poetry.berlin. And originally, while I was still living in France, I was in Montpellier, and I thought, well, maybe I can stay away from any kind of scene and just work through the digital medium and try to get my poetry, my voice, my writing, at the end of the day, out there. And I thought, I'm going to use the digital medium, and it's not enough. I mean, I came to Berlin because there's a scene here, there are other writers, there are scenes, there are great open mic events, you meet people, you see what others are doing, you get inspired, you compete a little bit, and that's good. And obviously, if you're going to self-publish a book, you have to find a printer, you have to find the right printer. If you're going to make a video, you have to find somebody like Sebastian Hoch, who lent me this camera. There's a community helps, and it's there's also something physical where people kind of get a feel for you, and which is not the same thing when you're just working through a digital medium. And when I was early on trying to get ebooks out there through Kindle or and whatnot, Amazon, there was this really annoying thing where basically what the fuck,